I teach third grade, so I know exactly what a child's face looks like the second she realizes she has been left out. I have seen it 100 times, at birthday parties and in cafeteria lines, and on the last day before winter break. I just never thought I would see it on my own daughter at my mother-in-law's Christmas tree. Every other child in that room got a gift that night. The cousins, the second cousins, even the neighbor's two little kids, children my mother-in-law had met maybe twice in her life. My little girl, Sadie, sat on the floor with empty hands and did not make a single sound. My mother-in-law believed family was blood, and she had spent years quietly drawing a line around my daughter and keeping her on the outside of it. That night, my husband stood up with an envelope in his hand and said one quiet sentence that turned the whole warm room to stone. And what happened next, nobody at that party will ever forget. Welcome back to the channel where the quiet ones who protect the people they love finally get the last word. If you have ever watched a child you adore be left out and felt your whole heart go cold, this story is for you. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe so the next one finds you. My name is Josie. I am 34, and I teach third grade in a small town in New Hampshire called Corliss. To understand what happened at that tree, you have to understand how my daughter ended up sitting under it with her hands open and nothing in them. And that story starts long before Constance Whitmore ever handed out a single gift. I met my husband Levi 5 years ago when Sadie was 4 years old. Sadie's biological father had left before she could walk. He signed away his rights without a fight, the way you'd sign for a package you never wanted, and disappeared into a life that had no room in it for her. For 2 years it was just the two of us, me and my girl, and I had made my quiet peace with the idea that it might always be. I was not looking for anyone. I had a daughter to raise and a classroom full of other people's children to love, and I told myself that was a full enough life for anyone. Those 2 years were hard in ways I don't talk about much. I was young and tired in the particular way that single mothers are tired, the kind of tired that lives in your teeth. I worked all day teaching and came home to a toddler who thought the sun rose because I told it to, and some nights after she was asleep, I would sit on the kitchen floor and let myself be scared for exactly 10 minutes before I got up and packed her lunch. Sadie's father had not just left. He had left cleanly, the way you close a browser tab, and the cleanness of it was its own kind of insult, because it meant she had never once cost him a single sleepless night. I used to lie awake doing the arithmetic of the future, wondering who would walk her into a school dance, who would teach her that a man could stay. I did not have an answer. I just had her, and I decided she would be enough, and she was. Then Levi came along. He is a big, gentle man who works as an electrician, and he has the patience of someone who has spent his whole life with his hands inside complicated things, tracing a fault back to its source, staying calm when the power is out and everyone else is panicking in the dark. He did not fall for me first. He fell for both of us at the same time. On our third date, he spent the entire evening building a blanket fort in my living room with Sadie while I watched from the kitchen doorway. And I knew, the way you know a true thing all at once, that this was a man who understood that loving me meant loving her. No asterisk, no conditions. I remember that night so clearly. He had come over meaning to take me to dinner, and Sadie, who was 4 and shy of men, had peeked at him from behind my leg and then, for reasons known only to 4-year-olds, informed him that she was building a fort and that he could help if he followed the rules. And this grown man, this broad-shouldered electrician who could have insisted on the restaurant, simply took off his good jacket, got down on the floor, and asked her with total seriousness where the load-bearing cushions went. They built it for 2 hours. We never made the reservation. I stood in that doorway watching a man I barely knew treat my daughter's imaginary architecture like the most important project in the world, and I felt something in my chest that I had shut off 2 years earlier quietly come back on, like a pilot light catching. We married a year later, and here is the thing I want you to hold on to. Levi never once, in 5 years, called Sadie his stepdaughter. He called her his daughter. In private, in public, on forums, to strangers, without ever thinking about it, because to him she simply was. I thought a love like that would be enough to carry us through anything. I just did not understand yet how hard some people will work to remind a child that she does not belong. Levi's family is the kind that talks about itself like a small kingdom. The Whitmores. There is an actual framed family tree hanging in my mother-in-law's front room, a real chart, hand-lettered, with branches and dates going back 200 years, and Constance Whitmore treats it roughly the way some people treat scripture. She can tell you which Whitmore settled which corner of the county, which Whitmore fought in which war, who married in, and who was, as she likes to put it, born to it. When I first joined the family, I found it charming. Family pride seemed like a warm thing, a sign that these were people who valued belonging. It took me a while to understand that for Constance, the chart was never about who you loved. It was about who counted. And by Constance's arithmetic, my daughter did not. It was never loud. That is the thing about this particular kind of cruelty, the kind a grown woman aims at a small child. It hides inside good manners. It was a warm hug for the other grandchildren, and a stiff little pat on the shoulder for Sadie. It was 3 presents under the tree with the cousins' names on them, and nothing with hers. It was the way Constance's voice went soft and bright for the others and cooled, just slightly, just enough that you could almost tell yourself you'd imagined it, when she turned to my girl. One Christmas, 2 years back, when Sadie was still small enough to ask her questions out loud, she tugged at a wrapped box under the tree that turned out to be for a cousin. And Constance took it gently out of her hands, with a smile that did not reach anywhere near her eyes, and said, "Those are for my real grandchildren, sweetheart, my real grandchildren." I heard it. Levi heard it. And a 7-year-old heard it too, and filed it away in the place where children keep the things that teach them what they are worth. For a long time, I told myself Sadie was too little to really notice. That is a lie parents tell themselves so they don't have to act. Children notice everything. They are tiny scientists of belonging, running the experiment constantly, measuring who gets the warm voice and who gets the cool one. And Sadie had been quietly running that experiment on her grandmother for years. The proof came on a Tuesday after school, the spring she turned 9. She was quiet in the car, which was not like her. And when I asked what was wrong, she looked out the window and said, in that small, flat voice children use for the questions that frighten them, "Mom, why doesn't Grandma Constance like me?" I nearly drove off the road. I asked her what she meant, buying myself time, and she listed it for me, calm and precise and devastating the way only a child can. Bethany's kids got bigger Easter baskets. Grandma hugged the cousins longer. Grandma had a special little nickname for every grandchild but her. "I think I did something," Sadie said. "I just can't remember what. I had to pull into a gas station and pretend I needed to fill up so she would not see my face. Because there in the back seat was my bright, kind, completely blameless little girl, doing the math, and the only answer the math would give her was that she herself must be the problem, that she had failed some test she never knew she was taking. There is no rage on earth like the rage of watching your child absorb someone else's poison and mistake it for her own reflection. I did not yell that night, and I did not cry where she could hear me. I waited until she was asleep, and then I told Levi we needed to talk. I have never seen Levi truly angry. Not the loud kind, not in 5 years. He goes the other way. He gets very still and very quiet, the way the air gets before real weather. And that night, sitting at our kitchen table while I told him what Sadie had said in the car, he got stiller than I had ever seen him. When I finished, he did not say anything for a long moment. Then he put his big, careful hands flat on the table, and he said, in a voice like cold iron, "She's my daughter. I don't care whose blood she's got. She's mine, and I am done letting my mother make her feel like a guest in this family." I told him I had tried, over the years, all the soft ways. I had dropped hints to Constance. I had pushed back gently. I had given her chance after chance to be better, and I had swallowed 100 small things to keep the peace, because that is what I do. That is the muscle I have built my whole life, the one that absorbs and tells itself it is keeping everyone safe. And Levi looked at me with so much love and so much frustration, and said the thing I needed to hear. "Keeping the peace isn't the same as protecting her," he said. "Sometimes the peace is the problem." He was right. I had been so busy not making waves that I had let my daughter float alone in cold water for years. That stopped that night. We did not yet know exactly what we were going to do. We only knew that we were finished managing Constance's feelings at the expense of Sadie's, and that whatever we did was going to be something real, something that could not be undone by a hug or a missing present, something that would answer that family tree on the wall with a truth Constance could not argue with. If you have ever loved a child who wasn't born to you, and watched someone treat that child as lesser, stay with me, because this is the part where we stopped asking permission. Drop a comment and tell me about a child you chose to love, blood or not. I read every one. It was Levi who said it first, a few nights later, lying in the dark where the hard true things get said. "I want to adopt her," he said. "Legally, I want to be her father on paper the way I already am everywhere else." I lay there in the quiet and felt my eyes fill. We had talked about it loosely before, the way you talk about someday. But this was different. This had a spine to it. And what struck me most was his reason, because it was not about Constance at all. "I don't want to do it to prove a point to my mother," he said. "I want to do it because Sadie deserves to know that one of her parents chose her. On purpose. With paperwork and a judge and everything. She didn't get to choose where she came from. But she should get to know, for the rest of her life, that she was chosen." I turned over and looked at him in the dark and thought, not for the first time, that I had somehow found the one good one. Sadie's biological father had signed his rights away years ago. No contest, no interest, a thing I had once felt as a wound and now understood as a strange mercy, because it meant the path was clear. There was no battle to fight, only a process to follow. And we decided, right there in the dark, to start it quietly. We would not tell Constance. We would not tell anyone. This was not going to be a weapon we announced or a threat we held over the family. It was going to be a gift, the realest one Sadie would ever get, and we were going to wrap it carefully and give it to her at exactly the right moment. The lawyer we found was a kind, brisk woman named Yvonne who handled step-parent adoptions all the time. And after she reviewed everything, she told us ours was about as simple as these things ever get. Because Sadie's biological father had already terminated his rights, there was no one to fight, no consent to chase down, no parent to notify or track. It would be, in her words, uncontested and clean. File the petition, submit the paperwork, a background check, a home study formality, and then a hearing in front of a judge who would, in all likelihood, simply sign the order and say congratulations. A few months, she said, maybe less. We started immediately, and we told no one. Not my parents, not Levi's, not Sadie herself, because we wanted to be certain before we let her hope. The petition went into the mail, and a quiet clock started ticking toward a courtroom that not one single Whitmore knew existed. While the paperwork moved through its quiet channels, the holidays came at us the way they always do, fast and loud and full of obligation. Constance called in early November to announce, in the tone of a woman planning a coronation, that this year's Christmas party was going to be the big one. The whole family, both sides of hers, Whitmore cousins from 3 counties. She was going all out, she said, and she wanted everyone there. And then she added the line that put a cold finger on the back of my neck. I've got something special for all the grandchildren this year, she said. Every last one of them. Every last one of them. I stood there holding the phone and felt the old careful part of me start doing what it always did, translating Constance, parsing her sentence for the trapdoor. Did all the grandchildren include Sadie? Or was Sadie, as always, the silent exception hiding inside the word all? With Constance, you could never be sure, and that uncertainty was itself the cruelty, the way she kept my daughter perpetually auditioning for a role the other children were simply born into. I almost asked her, point blank, whether my daughter was included in her every last one. I didn't, because I already knew that asking would only give Constance the pleasure of an answer she could shape however she liked. So I said we'd be there, and I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen with a bad feeling settling into my bones. Some part of me already knew how that party was going to go, and some part of me, the part that had stopped keeping the peace, was almost glad because we had an envelope on the way, and Constance had no idea she was setting her own stage. The confirmation that nothing had changed came a couple of weeks later, at a smaller family dinner, and it came from Bethany. Bethany is Levi's younger sister, Constance's daughter, and she has spent her entire life as a fully vested member of the kingdom, which has made her comfortable in the way that curdles, eventually, into casual cruelty. Her 2 kids are the golden ones, the ones Constance's voice warms for the most. That night the children were in the next room playing, and someone mentioned how well Sadie and Bethany's daughter got along, how sweet it was, 2 cousins so close in age. And Bethany, swirling her wine, smiled and said lightly, the way you'd comment on the weather, they are sweet together. Though Sadie's not really a Whitmore, is she? Not really a cousin, but it's nice she has someone to play with. Not really a Whitmore, not really a cousin. Said about 2 little girls who at that very moment had their arms around each other on the living room floor. I felt Levi go rigid beside me, and I put my hand on his knee under the table, because this was not the moment, not the place, not the way. I made myself smile, and I said something neutral, and I changed the subject. And inside, I took that sentence and I set it down next to all the others, in a growing pile of evidence I was building without quite admitting to myself that that was what I was doing. Bethany had no idea what she'd just confirmed. She thought she was making small talk. She was actually telling me that the rot was not just Constance. It was the whole orchard. And it told me with total clarity that the soft approach was finished. You cannot hint your way out of a family that has decided a child does not count. The hardest part, the part that still catches in my throat, is that Sadie loved them anyway. That is the thing about children. Their love does not keep score the way ours learns to. Even after the cool hugs and the missing presents and the special nickname she never got, Sadie still lit up every time we said we were going to Grandma Constance's. She practiced for that Christmas party like it was Broadway. She and one of the cousins had a little song and dance number they had been rehearsing for weeks, and Sadie worked on it every single night in our living room, narrating her own choreography, making me be the audience over and over. Grandma's going to love it, she told me, breathless, spinning across the rug. Everybody's going to be there. She wanted so badly to perform for them, to be seen by them, to earn, through effort and sweetness, the belonging that should have simply been hers from the start. And I would sit on the couch and clap and tell her she was wonderful, which she was, and my heart would break a little more each time, because I knew what I suspected was coming, and I knew that no amount of perfect spinning would move a single number in Constance's cold arithmetic. There was one night in particular I keep coming back to. She had finally gotten a tricky turn right, the one she'd been falling out of for a week, and she landed it and threw her arms up and yelled, "Did you see it? Grandma's going to see it?" And she was so lit up, so sure that this was the year, that this was the thing that would finally make her grandmother's face do what it did for the other kids. I said yes, I saw it, it was perfect. And then I went into the bathroom and ran the water so she wouldn't hear me, because I could see the whole thing coming like weather on a radar, and there was nothing I could do to make my daughter's love land on a person who had already decided to catch it and set it down. You cannot teach a 9-year-old to stop hoping. You can only stand in the blast radius of that hope and get ready to hold her when it goes off. That is what people like Constance never understand. The cruelty does not land on the adults who can take it. It lands on a 9-year-old practicing a dance for a grandmother who has already decided not to clap. I watched my daughter get ready to hand her whole open heart to a room that had a line drawn around her, and I made a quiet promise on that couch. This was the last Christmas she would ever spend trying to earn her place at a Whitmore table. One way or another, after this, she would never have to audition again. A few days before the party, Constance called and asked if I would come over to help wrap gifts and set up. She framed it as a kindness, an invitation, but with Constance there was always an undertow, a small power in being the one who summons. I went, partly because saying no would have cost more peace than I wanted to spend that week, and partly, if I am honest, because some watchful part of me wanted to see the operation up close. Her dining room was a Christmas factory. Rolls of paper, spools of ribbon, tags, stacks of boxes sorted into careful piles. We worked for an hour, folding and taping, Constance chattering about the menu and the cousins, and how nice it was that I could help. And at one point she sent me down the hall to the craft room to find another roll of the silver paper. The good kind, she said, in the cabinet by the window. The craft room was Constance's domain, a tidy little space with labeled bins and a sewing table. I opened the cabinet she'd described and started moving things aside to find the silver roll. And that is when I saw the box. It was not hidden exactly. It was just there on a shelf, a shoebox with the lid half off, and inside it was a stack of pale envelopes, and on top of them, a folded sheet of lined paper. I should not have looked. I know that. But the word at the top of that page caught my eye before I could stop myself, written in Constance's careful cursive and underlined twice. Grandchildren. I stood very still in that quiet room, the silver paper forgotten in my hand, and I picked up the list. The envelopes were savings bonds. I had opened the top one before I'd decided to, and there it was, a government savings bond made out in a child's name. The kind of gift a grandparent buys to say, I am investing in your future. I am betting on you. You are mine to plan for. I looked at the name on it. It was one of Bethany's kids. I set it down and picked up the list, and the list explained everything. It was an inventory. Down the left side, in Constance's tidy hand, were the names of her grandchildren. Every single one. And beside each name, a dollar amount and a small satisfied check mark. Bethany's too. The cousins, a grandchild I had met exactly once. Names of children who lived 3 counties away and saw Constance twice a year. Each one accounted for. Each one invested in. Each one, in Constance's careful cursive, claimed. I read that list twice, top to bottom, my heart slamming in that small, quiet room. And the thing that finally broke something open in my chest was not what was on the list. It was what wasn't. There was no Sadie. Not at the bottom. Not crossed out, not pending, not to be decided. My daughter's name simply did not appear anywhere on a document titled Grandchildren, a document that included children Constance could barely have picked out of a lineup. This was not forgetfulness. You do not forget to include a child who comes to your house, who practices a dance for your party, who calls you grandma. You leave her off, on purpose, with a pen. I stood there holding the proof of the thing I had spent years telling myself I might be imagining, and in that moment, every soft excuse I had ever made for Constance Whitmore quietly died. I did not confront her. I want you to understand the discipline that took. Because every cell in my body wanted to walk back into that dining room and lay the list on the table between the ribbon and the tape and ask her to read me the names out loud. But I am a 3rd-grade teacher. I have spent 15 years learning that the loudest reaction is almost never the one that actually protects a child. A scene in that craft room would have handed Constance exactly what she needed: the chance to call me hysterical, to make herself the wounded victim of my temper, to reframe a documented, deliberate pattern of exclusion as one unstable daughter-in-law's outburst. No, I have watched this exact dynamic play out in miniature 100 times in my own classroom. A child gets left off a birthday party list, or picked last, or quietly frozen out at the lunch table, and the parent who marches in furious, demanding names and apologies, almost always makes it worse for their kid, because the other children smell the adult heat and it becomes the thing everyone whispers about. But the parent who stays calm, who watches, who documents, who moves at the right moment with the right adult in the room, that parent actually changes something. You do not protect a child by being the biggest fire in the room. You protect her by being the steadiest hand in it. 15 years of that had trained my body for exactly this moment, and I was not about to waste the training in a craft room where the only witness was a woman who wanted me to lose control. So I put the list back exactly as I'd found it. I found the silver paper. I walked back into the dining room and I wrapped presents beside the woman who kept a ledger of which children deserved a future, and I made my voice completely normal, and I have never in my life been prouder of my own steadiness. Because I understood now, finally and completely, what I was dealing with. This was not coldness. Coldness is passive. This was a system, a deliberate, documented, ongoing decision to draw a circle and keep my daughter outside of it, maintained year after year with the same care Constance gave that family tree on her wall. And a system can only be answered by something equally real, not a fight, not a speech. A fact signed by a judge that no list in a shoebox could ever outrank. Before I left, when Constance stepped away to take a phone call, I asked her casually whether I could photocopy her grandchildren list, so I could help her match the bond envelopes to the right cards. A small, helpful lie that a woman who lives for organization could not possibly resist. She waved her hand and told me to use the machine in the office. So I drove home that afternoon with a copy folded in my purse, and the shape of the whole thing finally clear in my mind. The adoption was not just a gift for Sadie anymore. It was the one true answer to a question Constance had been asking my daughter her entire life, and I could not wait to deliver it. That night, after Sadie was asleep, I unfolded the copy and laid it flat on our own kitchen table, under the light, in front of Levi. He read it the way he reads a wiring diagram, slow and careful, his finger moving down the names. I watched him reach the bottom. I watched him go back to the top and read it again, because his mind, like mine, refused to accept the absence the first time. Then he looked up at me, his jaw tight, his eyes wet, and he didn't say anything for a long moment. So I said it for both of us, the sentence I'd been carrying since the craft room. Every name but hers, I said. She didn't forget Sadie. She kept a list and she left her off it on purpose. Levi set the paper down very gently, the way you'd set down something that might cut you. Then he said in that cold iron voice, "When does Yvonne think the judge signs?" "Soon," I told him. "Weeks. Maybe less." And right there, over a photocopied list of every grandchild Constance Whitmore had ever claimed, the two of us made our decision. Quiet and final. We would push to finish the adoption before Christmas. We would say nothing to anyone. We would walk into that party like always. And if Constance did at that tree what her own handwriting promised she would do, we would answer her once in front of everyone with the only document that mattered. And then we would take our daughter and go. The call came 8 days before Christmas. I was in my classroom, the kids out at recess, grading spelling tests, when my phone buzzed with Yvonne's name, and I answered it with my heart already in my throat. She was warm and quick, and she said the words I will remember for the rest of my life. "The judge signed this morning," she said. "It's done. Congratulations. Levi is legally Sadie's father. The new birth certificate is being processed, and you'll have certified copies of the decree within the week." I sat down in a tiny third-grade chair because my legs did not feel like mine. It was done. Somewhere in a courthouse, a judge had reviewed our boring, beautiful, uncontested paperwork and put his signature on a page that said, with the full weight of the law, that my daughter belonged fully and permanently to a man who had chosen her, not by blood, by decision. I called Levi from the parking lot, and I heard his voice break clean in half when I told him, this enormous, gentle man crying in a stranger's basement next to a furnace he was rewiring. We agreed in that call not to tell Sadie yet. We wanted to give it to her as a gift, wrapped at exactly the right moment. And we both knew, without either of us saying it, precisely when that moment would be. Constance's party was 4 days away. The certified copies would arrive before then. The decree arrived 2 days before Christmas. Certified copies in a flat envelope, the judge's signature crisp and real. Levi and I sat at the kitchen table after Sadie was in bed, and we built the gift, and I want to be clear that this was the part we let ourselves enjoy. We were not planning a humiliation. We were planning a coronation of our own, the kind that does not need anyone to be made small in order for someone else to be lifted up. Into a plain envelope, we put one of the certified copies of the decree, and a single sheet where Levi had written, in his careful block letters, words simple enough for a 9-year-old to understand. I have that note framed now, so I can tell you close to exactly what it said. It said, "Sadie, some dads are dads because of an accident. I get to be your dad because I picked you. I looked at you when you were 4 years old building a fort, and I picked you, and I have been picking you every single day since, and today a judge made it real forever. You did not do anything to earn this, and you cannot do anything to lose it. You are my daughter. That is not a feeling. It is the law now, and it is also just true. Love, Dad." He wrote it out 3 separate times, because his hand kept shaking and he wanted it to be neat. And the 2 rejected copies are still in a drawer in our kitchen, and I have never once been able to throw them away. And then we added the second thing, the thing that turned a legal document into a child's dream come true. Sadie had been obsessed for more than a year with the Northern Lights. She had a book about the aurora that she'd checked out of the school library so many times the librarian finally just gave it to her, and she could tell you about solar, wind, and green light and the best dark places in the world to stand and watch the sky catch fire. So Levi had booked it, a trip. The three of us in February, flying to Iceland to stand under the aurora in the cold, clear dark. We printed the confirmation and slid it into the envelope behind the decree. One envelope, two gifts. The legal truth that she was chosen, and the adventure that proved being chosen, was the beginning of a whole life of wonder. We sealed it and we wrote her name on the front, just Sadie in Levi's hand. And we made a quiet plan, nothing dramatic, just a readiness. If Constance gave our girl a gift like everyone else, the envelope could wait for Christmas morning at home, a private joy. But if she did at that tree what her list promised she'd do, then Levi would stand up and our daughter would open this one last. The Whitmore Christmas party was, I will admit, beautiful. Constance does not do anything halfway. The big old house glowed from the road, every window warm, a tree in the front room that nearly touched the ceiling, draped in 40 years of ornaments with a story attached to each one. The family poured in. Bethany and her husband and their two golden children. Great Aunt Rosemary, Constance's sister, with a car full of presents. Cousins from 3 counties. And just as promised, the neighbors from down the road with their 2 small kids, people Constance could barely have known, folded into the warmth as if belonging were the easiest thing in the world to hand out. Sadie wore the green velvet dress she'd picked out herself, and she had a candy cane in one hand and stars in her eyes, and she found her cousin the moment we walked in and immediately started whispering about their dance number. She was so happy. She was so completely, trustingly happy to be there. And watching her, I felt the old fear coil tight in my stomach, because I knew what was in my husband's coat pocket, and I knew what was probably about to happen by that tree. I want to be honest with you, because that is the only way these stories mean anything. Part of me even then hoped I was wrong. Part of me hoped that this year, with the whole family watching, Constance would simply hand my daughter a gift and let her be a child at Christmas, and that the envelope could stay folded in Levi's coat, a secret joy for another morning. I am a mother. I would have traded my whole satisfying ending for one ordinary moment of Constance just being kind to my kid. If you know that exact feeling, hoping against everything that someone will finally surprise you by doing the decent thing, tell me in the comments. I held my breath, and the party rolled on toward the tree. After dinner came the part the children had been vibrating for all evening. The gifts under the tree. Constance loves this ritual more than any other because it puts her at the center of it. The giver, the source. The warm sun all the little planets orbit. She settled into her armchair by the tree like a queen onto a throne, and she began the way she always does, by hand, one at a time, calling each child up by name. Mason, she sang out, and Bethany's son came running, and she made a little fuss over him as he tore into a big bright box. Piper and Bethany's daughter, another fuss, another squeal. The cousins from 3 counties, one by one, each name called with warmth. Each child hugged and handed something wonderful. And then, and I watched this happen with my own eyes, she called up the neighbor children, the 2 little ones she'd met maybe twice. And we didn't forget our special guests. Constance beamed, producing 2 wrapped gifts, and the neighbor kids lit up, and their parents made grateful noises, and the whole room glowed with the warmth of a generous woman on Christmas. I sat very still on the couch with Levi's hand in mine, his grip getting tighter with every name that wasn't hers, because the pile under the tree was shrinking. And I was watching my daughter, who had crept closer and closer to the front during the calling of names, who was standing now right near the edge of the circle of children, her candy cane forgotten in her hand, her face turned up toward her grandmother with a hope so naked it hurt to look at. She was waiting for her name. She had been waiting for her name her whole life, and the presents under that tree were almost gone. Constance reached under the tree, pulled out the last gift, and called a cousin's name. The cousin came and took it, and then Constance brushed her hands together, that small, satisfied gesture of a job well done, and looked around the circle of beaming children with the glow of a woman who had given everyone their due. The space under the tree was empty. There was nothing left, and Sadie was still standing there. My daughter stood at the edge of the circle in her green velvet dress, her hands open at her sides, and I watched the understanding move across her face in real time. The exact expression I have seen 100 times on 100 children at school and prayed I would never once see on her. The slow dawning, the recalculation, the hope folding itself quietly away. She looked at the empty space under the tree, and she looked at the other children clutching their presents, and she looked at her grandmother, who had already turned to say something to Aunt Rosemary, who had moved on, who was done. And Sadie did not cry. That is the part that broke me. She did not throw a fit or run to me or ask why. She just lowered her open hands, and she made herself very small and very still, and she sat down on the floor at the edge of the group, her face carefully arranged into the blank. Brave nothing that children learn, when they have decided not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it land. 9 years old, and she already knew how to absorb it in silence. She had learned that here in this room, and around her, slowly, the adults began to notice the silence too. A few smiles faltered. Someone shifted their weight. The warmth in the room developed a small cold crack down its center. It was Aunt Rosemary, of all people, who said it out loud. She glanced at Sadie sitting alone and empty-handed on the floor, and she said, in the bright, oblivious voice of someone just filling a silence, "Oh, Constance, did little Sadie not get one? Looks like you missed one, hun." The room went quiet in that particular way. The way a room goes quiet when everyone suddenly realizes they are about to find out something about the people they are with. And every adult eye moved to Constance. My mother-in-law, sitting on her throne by the tree with the firelight on her face, had a choice in that moment. She could have covered it. She could have said, "Oh my goodness, how silly of me," and produced something, anything, and saved my daughter and saved herself. Instead, Constance Whitmore looked at her sister, and she glanced at my daughter sitting on the floor, and she said with a small, dismissive smile and a voice pitched just loud enough to carry, "Those are for my real grandchildren, Rosemary." The same words. From 2 years ago, said again in front of the whole family, over the bowed head of a 9-year-old girl in a green velvet dress. The crack down the center of the room's warmth split wide open. I heard Bethany's husband mutter something under his breath. I saw a cousin's mouth fall open. I felt Levi beside me go absolutely still, that cold iron stillness, and I knew the waiting was over. I looked at my daughter, sitting small on the floor, having just heard her grandmother announce to the entire family that she was not real, and something in me that had been keeping the peace for 5 long years simply set down its burden and rose to its feet. But Levi stood up first. "I need to tell you what it costs not to scream," because in that moment, every instinct I have as a mother was a wildfire. I wanted to cross that room and tell Constance Whitmore exactly what she was, in front of God and the cousins and the neighbors she'd been so generous to. I wanted to grab my daughter and carry her out into the snow and never look back. But I have learned, in 15 years of classrooms and 5 years of this family, that the fire is not what protects a child. The fire makes you the story. It lets them say, "Did you see how she lost it?" And suddenly the conversation is about my temper instead of Constance's cruelty. So I did the hardest thing. I stayed calm. I put my hand on Sadie's shoulder, grounding her, telling her without words that I was right there, and I let the room hold its terrible silence for 1 beat longer. And in that silence, I saw something I will never forget. I saw Everett, my father-in-law, Constance's quiet husband of 40 years, start to rise from his chair at the back of the room. His face was stricken, his mouth opening as if he might finally, after all these years, say something. He half stood, and then his old habit caught him, and he glanced at Constance, and he sank back down, the words dying in his throat. It was the saddest thing in that room, sadder almost than Constance's cruelty, that 4 decades of deference could freeze a decent man at the exact moment his granddaughter needed him to be brave. But it did not matter in the end that Everett could not stand, because my husband could. Levi let go of my hand. He rose to his full height in the center of that warm, cracked, watching room, and he reached into his coat. Levi did not raise his voice. That is what made the whole room turn. A shout they could have dismissed. But a big, gentle man standing up slowly in total silence pulls every eye in a room like gravity. He took the plain white envelope out of his coat and held it up for a moment so the firelight caught it. And then he walked across the room, past the tree, past his mother in her chair, and he knelt down on the floor in front of Sadie so that his eyes were level with hers. The whole family watched. Constance watched, her satisfied little smile beginning, for the first time all night, to look uncertain. Levi held the envelope out to our daughter, and in a voice that was quiet and steady and meant only for her, even though everyone could hear it, he said the words. "Sadie," he said, "you open this one last." She looked at him, this child who had just been told in front of everyone that she wasn't real, and she took the envelope in her small hands. Her fingers were trembling. The room was so silent I could hear the fire pop. Sadie looked at her name written on the front in Levi's careful hand, and then she looked up at him, uncertain, checking, the way children do when they have learned that good things can be taken back. Levi just nodded at her, gentle as anything. "Go on, sweetheart," he said. "This one's really yours." And I watched my daughter, kneeling on the floor of a room that had spent her whole childhood telling her she did not belong, slide her finger under the flap of that envelope, while every single member of the Whitmore family held their breath. Constance had given out a dozen gifts that night to real grandchildren and near strangers alike, but not one of them was about to be opened the way this one was. Not one of them was going to change anything. This one was going to change everything. Sadie pulled out the papers. The first was Levi's note, his block letters, and she read it silently, her lips moving, and I watched her small face try to understand it. So Levi helped her. He put his finger on the official document behind the note, the one with the judge's signature and the heavy official heading, and he explained it to her the way you explain the biggest thing in the world to a 9-year-old. "That paper," he said softly, "is from a judge. It's the law now, Sadie. It says that I'm your dad, not a pretend dad, not a stepdad. Your real, legal, forever dad, written down and signed and true. I adopted you. You're my daughter officially, and nobody can ever change that or take it back." For a second she did not move, and then it hit her, the whole size of it. And my brave girl, who had not cried when she was left empty-handed in front of everyone, burst into tears and threw her arms around Levi's neck, and he caught her and stood up with her, lifting her right off the floor, holding my daughter, our daughter, in the middle of that silent room. And then Sadie, with her face buried in his shoulder, said the word she had never quite let herself say before. She said, "Dad," out loud, in front of everyone. The room made a sound, a collective intake of breath, somebody's quiet sob, Aunt Rosemary's hand flying to her mouth. Bethany's daughter, Sadie's cousin, the one she'd been rehearsing the dance with, pushed up from the floor and ran across the room and threw her arms around both of them, Levi and Sadie together, and buried her face in Sadie's shoulder. And I heard her say, muffled, "You're really my cousin now," as if a judge in a courthouse 2 towns over had settled something she'd been quietly worried about too. Because that is the thing the grown-ups in that family had never understood. The children had never drawn the line. The line was Constance's. It had always only been Constance's, held in place by everyone's politeness, and the moment one person refused to hold it up anymore, the whole thing came down, and underneath it were just kids who had always known they were cousins. And I stood up. I did not shout. I did not even walk toward Constance. I just stood beside my husband and my crying, beaming daughter, and I said in a voice pitched calm and clear for the whole room to hear, the only sentence I had prepared. "She's a Whitmore now," I said. "By law, by choice, and by every single Christmas you spent pretending she wasn't." Then the room turned, slowly, all of it, away from the child by the tree and toward the woman on her throne. And Constance Whitmore, for the first time in the 40 years of her kingdom, had nothing to hand anyone. Constance came up out of her chair. The composure she'd worn all night, the warm hostess glow, cracked apart, and what came out from under it was pure heat. She was not ashamed. That is the thing I want you to understand about people like Constance. Even caught, even exposed, even with a sobbing, newly adopted child in the center of the room, her first emotion was not shame, it was fury at being caught. "How dare you," she said, her voice rising and shaking. "How dare you turn my Christmas into a performance? You planned this. You set me up in my own home to humiliate me in front of the whole family." She looked around the room for her usual chorus, the nods, the agreement, the soft landing she had always been given, and she did not find it. The faces around her were not on her side, so she doubled down because it was all she had left. "I have nothing to apologize for. I love my family, my real family. I never asked for someone else's child to be treated like she was my own flesh and blood, and I will not sit in my own home and be." And that is where Levi cut her off, not loudly, just one word, her name, Mom, like a door closing, and she actually stopped. I stepped forward then just one step, and I kept my voice level because I had finally learned from her of all people that the calm voice is the one that wins. "You kept a list, Constance," I said. "I saw it. Every grandchild's name with a bond and a check mark. You bought a future for children you've met twice. And you sat my 9-year-old daughter on your floor and told a room full of people she wasn't real." The silence was total. And Constance's eyes flicked just once toward the hallway, toward the craft room, toward the shoebox. And in that tiny, involuntary glance, the whole family saw the truth confirmed. "You humiliated yourself," I said, gently now almost kindly. "Every year, one missing gift at a time, we just stopped helping you hide it." And Constance, who had always had something to say, opened her mouth and found, for once in her life, that there was nothing in it. For a moment, nobody moved. And then, from the back of the room, Everett stood up. This time, he did not look at Constance first. He crossed the room slowly, an old man in a Christmas sweater, and he knelt down in front of Sadie the way Levi had, his knees cracking, and he reached into his own pocket. He took out his pocket watch, the heavy old one I had seen him check 100 times, the one his own father had given him, a real Whitmore heirloom if there ever was one. And he pressed it into Sadie's small hands and closed her fingers around it and said, his voice rough and breaking, "This was my dad's. I want you to have it, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it took me this long." Sadie looked at the watch and at her grandfather and she said, "Thank you, Grandpa." And the simple grace of it, the way she still had a grandpa in her heart to give, undid half the room. Constance watched her husband of 40 years choose the child she had crossed off her list, and something in her face finally flickered. Not quite shame, even then, but the first crack in the certainty that had ruled her whole life. We did not stay to watch it finish breaking. That was never the point. The point was never to destroy Constance. The point was Sadie. So Levi set our daughter down and I took her hand and we got our coats. We said Merry Christmas to the cousins and to Everett and to Aunt Rosemary, who was crying openly now, and we walked out of that warm, bright house into the falling snow. The three of us, our daughter between us, a pocket watch in one hand and an envelope in the other. We did not slam the door, and we did not look back. We just left, heads up together, a family walking out into the clean, cold dark. In the parking lot, with the snow coming down soft and the house glowing behind us, Sadie stopped and looked up at me, and she asked the question I had been dreading and waiting for at the same time. "Mom," she said, "do we have to come back here?" I knelt down in the snow so we were eye to eye, the way Levi and Everett had, because some things you have to say at a child's level. "Here's how it's going to be," I told her. "We will always, always have room for people who love you the real way. Grandpa Everett, if he keeps being brave like he was tonight. Anyone who is kind to you. Our door stays open for love. But you are never again going to sit at a table where you have to earn your place at it. Not ever. You don't audition for family, you just are it. And you are ours." She thought about that the way she thinks about everything, seriously. And then she nodded and held up her envelope and asked, "Can we really go to Iceland?" And just like that, she was 9 again. And we laughed in the snow, and it was over. I want to tell you what she did in the car on the way home, because it is the thing I hold on to when I wonder whether we did the right thing by doing it there, in front of everyone, instead of quietly at home. She was buckled in the back, the pocket watch in one hand and the envelope in the other, and she was quiet for a long time, and I thought maybe the whole night had finally caught up with her. And then, from the back seat in the dark, she said, "Mom, I'm not going to do the dance anymore." My heart dropped because I thought she meant she was giving up, folding herself smaller again. But then she said, "I don't have to practice being theirs anymore. I already am somebody's." And Levi reached back without taking his eyes off the road and squeezed her knee, and none of us said anything else the whole way home because there was nothing left that needed saying. The weeks after were quieter than you would think. Constance sent a few texts, defensive at first, then silent, the ball sitting in her court exactly where we'd left it. We did not chase her. An apology you have to demand isn't worth the breath it takes to ask for. But Everett came by on his own the week after Christmas. He sat at our kitchen table and cried a little, and he asked if he could take Sadie to the Science Museum, just the two of them. And he has been showing up ever since, a grandfather building something real from scratch, without his wife's permission and without her list. I asked him once, gently, "Why now, after all these years?" He turned his coffee cup around in his big hands for a while before he answered. He said that he had spent 40 years telling himself that keeping his head down kept the peace, that it was easier to let Constance run things than to fight a war he would lose. And then he said that watching my husband kneel down on that floor had shown him the difference between peace and cowardice, at 71 years old, in his own living room, and that he was too old to waste whatever years he had left being on the wrong side of it. He did not say much more than that. Everett is not a man of speeches, but he has not missed a single one of Sadie's dance recitals since, and he sits in the front row every time, and he claps like the building is on fire. And in February, the three of us flew to Iceland. We stood in a field in the freezing dark with our breath fogging the air, and the sky above us caught fire, green and violet, rivers of light pouring across the stars. Sadie tilted her head all the way back and stared up at it with her whole face open. And she reached out and took Levi's gloved hand in hers, and without looking away from the sky, easy as breathing, she said, "Thanks, Dad. Not a performance. Not for anyone, just true." Levi didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just held his daughter's hand under the northern lights. A man who had chosen a little girl on purpose, with a judge and a piece of paper and his whole entire heart. And I stood beside them in the cold, watching my family glow under that impossible sky, finally completely whole. Somewhere back home, on a wall in a big house, there was a hand-lettered family tree with 200 years of names on it, and my daughter's name was not on it, and I found, standing under all that light, that I did not care even a little. Some families you are born into. The real one, the one that counts, is the one that stands up in a crowded room and claims you out loud. Sadie has that one now. She will have it for the rest of her life. Family was never about whose blood you carry. It is about who stands up in a crowded room and says out loud, "This child is mine." If you made it all the way to the end, then you already know that cold feeling, watching a child you love get left out and finally deciding to stop pretending it's fine. The empty hands by the tree, the list with one name missing, the envelope, the walk into the snow. Maybe someone stood up for you once the way Levi stood up for Sadie. Maybe you have been the one who stood up. Tell me in the comments who claimed you, or who you claimed, blood or not. Share this with someone who needs to hear that love is a choice you make out loud. And subscribe, because the children who get chosen on purpose deserve a whole sky full of light. I'll see you in the next one.